Okay, welcome back to part 2 of poorly performed requirements assessment. We're using the characteristics and rules defined in the CoChair guide to writing requirements to define well-formed design input requirements. In part 1, we gave an introduction and covered some of the requirements, and now we're going to continue with that presentation and address more requirements that have defects, assess what the defects are, and then write an improved version of that requirement. So the LIR shall try to install a lid on a jar within approximately every 10 seconds of receiving a jar in place message and report when lid installation is complete. So we want to avoid the use of superfluous infinitives or escape clauses like try to, else the requirement is ambiguous and not verifiable. We want to avoid the use of vague terms like approximately, else the requirement is ambiguous, not verifiable. Want to avoid combiners like and. We want to write a single sentence that contains a single thought conditioned by a qualified relevant subclauses. Installing and reporting are two separate actions. Receiving a message from which system, what form, what media. This action involves an interaction with another entity, so it is an interface requirement and must point to where the interaction is defined in ICD, else the requirement is not complete. And then report to what system, what form, what media. This action involves an interaction as well with another entity. So it's an interface requirement and must point to where the interaction is defined, else the requirement is not complete. So improved, we have two requirements. The LIR shall install a lid on a jar within 10 seconds of receiving from the FCR CNM software a jar in place message having the characteristics defined in the FCR ICD. The LIR shall report within 1 second the completion of lid installation to the FCR CNM software as defined in the FCR ICD. Terms like jar in place, lid installation message are all capitalized, indicating that those are included in the glossary. Within 10 seconds, within 1 second, we have time performance value as to when the requirement is expected to be implemented by the LIR. The robot lid installer shall install lids on all the jars every shift. So again, we must be consistent in the use of terms, must use LIR consistently throughout the LIR requirement set rather than any other synonyms like robot lid installer. In the LIR set of requirements, all requirements should begin with LIR shall. Avoid absolutes such as all and every, else the requirement is ambiguous, not verifiable. Lids jar shift must be defined terms. It seems the intent of the requirements to define a quality requirement concerning an acceptable and feasible percentage of lids to be successfully installed per shift given the jars are delivered per the JPS ICD positioning and timing. So an improved version, the LIR shall install lids on at least 99% of the jars presented as defined in the JPS ICD XYZ. Note that we need to define each quantity with a range of values appropriate to the entity to which the quantity applies and against which the entity will be verified or validated. So why do I use at least 99% rather than stating an absolute value of 99%? Also note that we need to be careful when stating performance values from a feasibility and cost perspective. Is 99% really what the LIR must achieve? A lower value like 97% or 98% may all be that is needed at a lower cost. The LIR shall monitor its health and status frequently and shall report its health and status about every 60 when it can. So the first part is written as a goal, should, must be written as a requirement shall on the entity which it applies, the LIR shall. Requirement should be single thought. Avoid combiners like and. Avoid vague terms like frequently and about, else requirements ambiguous and not verifiable. Provide specific measurable performance targets appropriate to the entity to which the need or requirement is stated and against which the entity will be verified to meet. When stating quantities, common units of measure should be used. 60 is a value that must have proper units included. 60 of what? Seconds. Avoid escape clauses like when it can, else the requirement is ambiguous, not verifiable. Or if you're using a qualifying clause to state when the requirement applies, is acceptable. Avoid parentheses and brackets containing subordinate text. Improved written-as to requirements. The LIR shall update the LIR health and status every TBD minutes, plus or minus 0.1 minute, when the LIR is powered. The LIR shall report the LIR health and status every TBD minutes, plus or minus 1 minute, to the FCR C&M software as defined in the FCR ICD XYZ. Except under exceptional circumstances, baseline requirements must not contain unknowns like to be defined, to be specified, to be resolved clauses, else the requirement is not complete. When you first start writing requirements and the number is not there, then it's good to put a bracket around it to indicate something that has to be determined. And then it'd be an action item to somebody to determine exactly what the timing must be. When you baseline requirements, you would replace the TBD with the actual agreed to time value. The AR must report changes in the state or status immediately. Convention states a requirement is indicated by the use of the word shall rather than must or may. The AR shall report to which entity, in what form, using which media. This action involves interaction with another entity, so it's an interface requirement and must point to where the interaction is defined. An ICD, else the requirement is not complete. System state must be defined in data dictionary. Does a change in the state and a change in the status imply the same thing? Or are they two different distinct things that must be reported? What are the various states of the system? Use of rationale could help remove this ambiguity. Define temporal dependencies explicitly instead of using indefinite temporal keywords such as immediately, else the requirement is ambiguous and not verifiable. So we have the LIR shall report to the FCR C&M software changes in the system state as defined in the FCR ICD XYZ within 1 second of occurrence. And then the rationale, we can say the FCR software must be notified of any change in the state or change in the status of the LIR in order to properly control and manage the LIR, especially when the change prevents the LIR from installing lids, which would require the JPS to be commanded to cease operations until the LIR is repaired and returned to service. The LIR shall execute all commands received quickly and should report when it has completed any command as soon as possible. The second part is written as a goal, should. It must be written as a requirement shall of the entity to which it applies. The LIR shall. Requirements be single thought, avoid the use of combiners like and. Use each instead of all and any or both when universal quantification is identified. Avoid the use of vague terms like quickly. Rather, include a specific measure in which the action is to be performed, else the requirement is ambiguous, not verifiable. Avoid escape clauses such as soon as possible, else the requirement is ambiguous and not verifiable. Receive from which entity, what are the characteristics of the received commands, what media is used to receive the commands. These actions involve an interaction with another entity, so interface requirements. As such, the requirement must refer to an ICD where these things are defined, else the requirement is not complete. Also must consider security and only accept valid commands from the FCR C&M software. So improved written as for requirements, each is a separate action that must be verified. The LIR shall receive from this FCR C&M software commands defined in FCR ICD XYZ. The LIR shall only accept commands from the FCR C&M software that meet the security protocols defined in FCR ICD XYZ. I highlighted only because it's debatable whether the word only is needed there. Some may say it improves the ability to understand what the intent is. Others say that the word's not needed. It's up to you and your organization to decide what convention you would use. The LIR shall execute each valid command defined in the FCR ICD XYZ within 1 second of receipt from the FCR C&M software. And here I have a capitalized valid command indicated as defined in the data dictionary. The LIR shall report completion of each command to the FCR C&M software as defined in the FCR ICD XYZ within 1 second. So again, we have within 1 second. in these two requirements so that we have some type of a performance that we can verify against. Shutdown shall occur automatically. So it's written in passive voice without stating the entity responsible for the action, the LAR shall. So even though it doesn't have a shall be in it, you can see that because it doesn't have a subject, the LAR shall, it's doing the action, then it's passive voice. Shutdown must be clearly defined. Does it mean remove all power from all parts of the LAR? Does it mean to enter a sleep state such that it can still respond to a command to power up, yet conserve power for all other subsystems? What is the trigger for end of shift shutdown? An expected performance value must specify stating the time in which the action must be completed. Avoid the use of vague terms and temporal dependencies explicitly instead of using indefinite temporal keywords such as automatically. The LR shall execute the end of shift shutdown sequence within 1 second of end of shift. And note, end of shift sequence and end of shift must be clearly defined. What action does the LR take when end of shift occurs? What triggers end of shift message? Given the expectation of automatically, this can imply the LR is aware of the time a shift ends and sets this parameter to true when this time is reached without any outside indication from the LCR C&M software. This line of thinking leads to the next requirement. The FCR C&M software shall provide the LAR with the current time about every minute. So we want to ensure the subject and verb of the requirement statement is appropriate to the entity which statement refers. So the requirement is written on the SCR C&M software. All the requirements in the LAR requirement set must be written for the LAR shall. Current time must be clearly defined. Avoid vague terms like about, else the requirement is ambiguous and not verifiable. What are the characteristics of the time parameters provided? What media is used to receive the current time? These actions involve an interaction with another entity, so are our interface requirements. As such, the requirement must refer to an ICD where these things are defined, else the requirement is not complete. From an off-nominal perspective, what happens if FCR fails to send a current time to the LAR? If this happens, it's likely that the FCR C&M software is at fault, which should trigger all the systems command and monitored by the FCR C&M software to halt operations. Approved written as two requirements. The LAR shall update LAR current time to the FCR current time received from the FCR C&M software as defined in FCR ICD. If the FCR current time fails to be updated at least once a minute, the LAR shall execute the end of shift shutdown sequence within 1 second of when the fault is discovered. The first requirement indicates that the LAR is going to have a parameter called LAR current time that is synchronized with the FCR current time that's received from the FCR C&M software as defined in the ICD. The ICD is going to talk about the format of that time, how often that time is communicated. Then the second requirement addresses the case where the current time value is not being updated from the FCR C&M software. So if the FCR current time fails to be updated at least once a minute, the LAR shall execute the end of shift shutdown sequence within 1 second of when the fault is discovered. So this is one of the faults that it's monitoring for. There's other requirements concerning faults, but this particular one concerns the time. The facility power shall be used to operate the LAR using standard power connections. So passive voice shall be, we want to use active voice with the responsible entity clearly identified as subject to the sentence. We need to define what is meant by operate. Avoid the use of vague terms like standard, else the requirement is ambiguous, not verifiable. Power is being obtained from the facility, so this is an interface requirement, which must point to where the interaction is defined in terms of both characteristics of the power as well as the physical interface plug and pin assignments. As such, a requirement must refer to an ICD where these things are defined, else the requirement is not complete. Requirements must communicate a single thought. Power characteristics and connectors are two different things. Must also consider the off-nominal case of an overvoltage condition, which must be defined. Written as three requirements. The LAR shall operate using 110 to 120 volt AC 60 Hz 30 amp facility power, having the characteristics defined in facility drawing XYZ. And I go to that drawing, there'll be a table that talks about the exact voltage range, the current range, any noise, startup, transients, and so on. The LR shall receive facility power using EIC 320 compatible electrical three-prong connectors defined in facility drawing XYZ. If an overvoltage condition, the LIR shall remove power from all internal systems. The LIR shall be able to install lids in a normal operating environment. Avoid superfluous infinitives like be able to. Avoid vague terms like normal, else the requirement is ambiguous and not verifiable. We need to clearly define what the operating environment is. Given there are multiple parameters used to define the operating environment, like temperature, humidity, airflow, it is common practice for the requirement to point to where these parameters are defined, either within a set of requirements or another configuration control form that defines the operating environment in which the system is to operate. For this example, the electromagnetic environment is addressed separately in the next requirement. So we have the LIR shall meet the LIR design input requirements while operating in the operating environment defined in Table 1. Note that given the table contains multiple parameters defining the operating environment, some would say that to address the characteristics C5 singular and rule R18 single thought, there should be multiple requirements, each addressing a single parameter. In doing this, others have a valid concern associated with the characteristic C13 comprehensible. They feel that by having multiple requirements, it kind of muddies the water, losing the main thought of operating environment. They think it's okay to refer to the table. But no matter the approach taken, the system must be verified for each of the parameters. It is up to the organization to decide which approach they choose to take and then be consistent in the application of this approach. And note the phrase meet the LIR design input requirements is used as it communicates more comprehensively the intent rather than other terms like meet all functional requirements, which excludes what is referred to as non-functional requirements. The LIR shall operate in the presence of any electromagnetic emissions. We need to define operate, avoid the use of vague terms that provide vague quantifications such as any, else the requirement is ambiguous, not verifiable. We must define the specific electromagnetic emissions within which the LIR must operate. Given the definition of electromagnetic emissions must be done as a function of frequency and magnitude, a diagram is more appropriate to the specific values. When a requirement is related to complex behavior, it's a good practice to refer to a supporting diagram as talked about in Rule 23. The improved version of this, the LIR shall meet the LIR design input requirements while operating in the presence of electromagnetic emissions up to and including those shown in diagram 2. Note, again, the meet LIR design input requirements is used as it communicates more comprehensively intent rather than other phrases like meet all functional requirements, which excludes what is referred to as non-functional requirements. The LIR shall be able to work after being shipped in shipping crates exposed to the shipping environment for approximately 24 hours. Avoid superfluous infinitives like be able to. Work is ambiguous, as would be the word survive or function. What is really the intent? Must clearly define what the shipping environment is, given there are multiple parameters, temperature, humidity, loads, particulates. To define shipping environment is common practice for the requirement to point to where these parameters are defined, either within a set of requirements or other configuration control form that defines the shipping environment in which the system is to operate. We must avoid vague terms like approximately, and then 24 what, minutes, hours. When stating quantities, all numbers should have appropriate and consistent units of measure explicitly stated using a common measurement system in terms of the thing the number refers. The LIR shall meet LIR design input requirements after being shipped in shipping crates exposed to the shipping environment defined in Table 3 for up to 24 hours. Again, note that meet the LIR design input requirements is used as it communicates more comprehensively the intent rather than other terms like meet all functional requirements, which excludes what is referred to as non-functional requirements. And then see the previous note concerning singular one thought versus comprehensibility when referring to tables. The LAR shall be capable of operating after being exposed to an unconditioned storage environment for more than 3 years. We want to avoid superfluous infinitives like be capable of, is operating the proper word to communicate the intent. What about all other requirements besides those associated with operating? Must clearly define what the unconditioned storage environment is, what is meant by unconditioned. Given there are multiple parameters used to define the storage environment, it is common practice for the requirement to point to where these parameters are defined, either within the set of requirements or another configuration control form that defines the storage environment in which the system is to be stored. More than 3 years is open-ended. We must define each quantity with a range of values appropriate to the entity to which the quantity applies and which the entity will be verified or validated. So an improved version, the LAR shall meet the LR design input requirements after being stored in shipping crates exposed to the unconditioned storage environment defined in Table 5 for up to 3 years. So I've capitalized unconditioned storage environment as a term that could be defined, but you could question whether the words unconditioned storage needs to be even included. You could just say shipping crates exposed to the environment defined in Table 5 for up to 3 years, and that's probably sufficient. And again, to meet the LAR design input requirements is used as it communicates more comprehensively the intent rather than other terms like meet all functional requirements, which excludes what is referred to as non-functional requirements. And then see the previous note concerning singular one thought versus comprehensibility when referring to tables. The LAR shall not be damaged after being sprayed with the liquid from the fire suppression system. We want to avoid the use of the word not. Avoid the use of vague terms that provide vague quantification like damaged, else the requirement is ambiguous and not verifiable. What is meant by damaged? How can the intent be communicated such as clear what is meant? What kind of liquid sprayed at what rate for how long? Is there a drying time after being sprayed before the requirement applies? An improved version here is the LIR shall meet the LIR design input requirements after being sprayed with 15 plus or minus 2 gallons per minute water spray for up to 5 minutes and allowed to dry for at least 24 hours. And again, the phrase meet the LIR design input requirements is used as it communicates more comprehensively the intent rather than other terms like meet all function requirements, which excludes what is referred to as non-functional requirements. The use of and, all uppercase, is a convention to express logical expressions rather than using and lowercase, which is a combiner, which often ties two thoughts together, violating Rule 18 concerning single thought sentences. So in this case, we have two conditional clauses that are connected by a logical and, which means that both apply. Both must be true for the requirement to be applicable. It should be able to operate within the space provided within the work area. Avoid the use of personal and indefinite pronouns. Written as a goal, should, must be written as a requirement, shall on the entity which applies. The LIR shall. Avoid superfluous infinitives like be able to. Need to define what is meant by operate. Need to define specifically the space in which the LIR must limit operations, else the requirement is ambiguous and not verifiable. A supporting diagram will clearly show the space in which the LIR must operate. So we can say the LIR shall limit operations to within a 4-foot wide by 16-foot long by 8-foot high volume within the LIS as shown in Figure 1. The LR dimensions shall be less than 4-foot wide by 16-foot long by 8-foot high. This requirement should be written in the LR, not a characteristic of the LAR. So rather than LR dimensions, it should say LAR shall. The specific intent and amount of detail of the need and requirement statement must be appropriate to the level of abstraction, organization, system architecture to which the entity applies. As worded, the real intent of the need statement that the requirement was transformed from was misinterpreted. The intent was to find a volume in which LIR must limit operations, not the specific size of the LIR. So we have the LIR shall limit operations to within a 4-foot wide by 16-foot long by 8-foot high volume within the LAS as shown in Figure 1. The LIR must be capable of quickly fitting through a 3x7 door when fully assembled. So a convention states requirement is indicated by the use of the word shall rather than must or may. We want the LIR shall. Avoid superfluous infinitives like be capable of. Define temporal dependencies explicitly instead of defining indefinite temporal keywords as quickly. What does 3x7 mean? When stating quantities, all numbers should be appropriate and consistent units of measure explicitly stated using common measurement system in terms of the number it refers. It is not clear whether the LIR is being moved on its own set of wheels or in some type of transport mechanism when it's being moved through the door opening. So an improved version is the LIR shall fit through a 3-foot wide by 7-foot high door opening when fully assembled and on the supplier provided dolly without having to remove the door. So again, they're using the word and as a logical expression rather than using the lowercase n, which is a combiner, which often ties two thoughts together, violating the single thought sentence rule. In this context, the total height of the LIR and the dolly must be less than 7 feet. The qualifying phrase without having to remove the door makes it clearest the intent in the use of the word quickly in the original requirement. Having to remove the door would add considerable time when moving the LIR through the door opening. Anyone within the production facility should be able to move the robot. This is a good need. Again, it's not stated as a well-formed requirement. Vague terms like anyone is too large a population, members of which may have difficulties doing the task. We need to be more specific. Also, does imply a single person. What are the assumed capabilities of this person? It's written as a goal should and not as a requirement shall on the LIR. It should be written LIR shall. We want to avoid superfluous infinitives like be able to. It's not clear whether the LIR is being moved on its own or on some type of transport mechanism. To be verifiable, a specific value of force needs to be included within the requirement statement. The reason and source for this number should be addressed in the rationale. So we have the LIR shall limit the force needed to move the LIR to less than 10 pounds when the LIR is loaded on the supplier furnished dolly. And then we include rationale to make it clear why this requirement is here. We say, given there's only a single maintenance technician on call during operations, the single maintenance technician must be able to move, push, pull the LIR within the facility when the LIR is placed on the supplier furnished dolly. Studies have been done to show 10 pounds of force to start and stop movement of the LIR when on the supplier furnished dolly is within the capabilities of the maintenance technicians employed within the facility. Once in motion, this force is reduced to less than this value. All maintenance technicians that are employed must demonstrate an ability to apply a push and pull force of 10 pounds when placed on the dolly as a condition of employment. This requirement is stated in this manner to give the supplier options concerning the mass of the LIR and the design of the dolly. This capability is also factored into the mean time to repair requirement that's defined later. The LIR shall be capable of installing lids on the jars located on the conveyor belt through the opening. Avoid superfluous infinitives like be capable of, what conveyor belt, what opening, what is the location and what are the dimensions of the opening. A supporting diagram will clearly show the location and dimensions of the opening in which the LIR must operate. So an improved version, the LIR shall install lids in the jars located on the JPS conveyor belt through this 3-foot by 3-foot inch opening located between the LIS and the CBS as shown in Figure 2. Note there's a previous requirement concerning the location of the jars on the conveyor belt. This requirement is adjusted to the fact that CBS is located on the other side of the 3-foot by 3-foot opening in the LIS wall. The figure shows where the opening is located on the wall and how high the bottom of the opening is above the floor. The LIR shall shut down as fast as possible whenever any failure is detected. We need to clearly define what is meant by shutdown, what specific actions are intended to be performed. We want to avoid the use of the vague terms like fast, rather provide specific measurable performance targets appropriate to the entity to which the need or requirement is stated and against which the entity will be verified to meet. Avoid the inclusion of escape clauses that state vague conditions or possibilities, such as fast as possible. Avoid the use of vague terms like any. Rather than any failure, we need to define specific what types of failures are intended to be acted upon. All failures are only critical failures that result in AR unable to install lids. So an improved version of this is the LAR shall execute the end of shift shutdown sequence within 1 second whenever a critical system failure is identified. So now the phrases end of shift shutdown sequence and critical system failure must be clearly defined for this requirement to be verifiable. So it's been a while, so let's take another break and then we'll pick up with this presentation.